Joining me now, Atlantic staff writer Nancy Youssef and former Pentagon official and senior fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, Elizabeth Dent. As I welcome you both, Elizabeth, you first here, because the president declared the ceasefire over and warned of further military action, but said negotiations will continue and he doesn't expect to return to all-out war, which kind of, sounds counterproductive to negotiating a peace deal. Are we in a period of neither war nor peace, with just constant back and forth between hostilities and negotiations? I mean, is there even a name for a status like that? Because ceasefire doesn't seem to work.
Right. I think that you explained it quite well. I mean, frankly, these kinds of things do happen and can happen. Unfortunately, Iran has been very clear that they are not going to return to the negotiating table until the United States halts strikes. We haven't seen strikes over the last couple of days. But again, all that it would take to kick that off again would be, and what kicked off this last round, would be the United States working with some of the vessels to go through the southern route, which is closer to Oman, and have the Iranians feel as though they are being circumvented, which is sort of their view here is that the MOU was very clear in laying out that they would have control and allow access for vessels to transit the strait.
Mm-hmm. Nancy, you write in a recent article, conflict during ceasefire negotiations is hardly unprecedented and doesn't necessarily mean a return to full-on hostilities. So explain what you mean there, and how long can conflict last before it upends a ceasefire, or trying at least to get to one?
So the reason I wanted to point that out is that it's rare that these scenarios are binary. So, for example, during the Korean War, some of the worst fighting happened during the negotiation period. And in Vietnam, we saw years of fighting. And I should note, in the Korean War, ultimately, it was an armistice and leaving us still technically at war. Because what happens is it's sort of the mix between carrot and stick. Right, that there's diplomacy that's happening, but the use of military force to remind the carrots that each side has as they're trying to reach the best terms for themselves. I think what makes this situation different is that there isn't an agreement on the foundations of what those talks look like. If we're not agreeing, as Elizabeth points out, the terms under which the Iranians are supposed to allow safe passage of ships through the Strait of Hormuz, it makes it very difficult to move forward in a way that substantially leads to a long-term solution. Remember that these negotiations began about resolving issues around Iran's nuclear program, their proxies. And once again, we find ourselves having a discussion about the Strait of Hormuz, which this memorandum of understanding was supposed to put to bed for now to deal with the issues that the United States wanted to address first. And so ceasefires are complicated. They always are. But what makes this situation so unique is the ambiguity around the steps to go forward so that diplomacy can become the predominant form of ending this conflict.
Well, Nancy, bombings and oil sanctions led to this current predicament. So why does the administration think these tactics will yield a different result this time? What might the administration's next steps be?
So here's what I see happening. The Iranians are saying, we're not going to give up control of the Strait of Hormuz. We're going to continue to hold out leverage. And the United States is saying, we want it to go back to February 27th, the day before the war started. And we don't want to resume fighting. And I think those are very hard things to achieve. Either the United States has to say that it is willing to fight aggressively for the Strait of Hormuz to be open, or that it accepts some change in terms of how the strait operates in light of what's happened in the war. I think militarily what you saw happen over the last few days and could continue to see is a sort of controlled escalation where the United States strikes at the resources that Iran uses to hold leverage over the strait. You saw them attacking, for example, some of the fast boats, the drone launchers, other assets that they use to hold the strait, so that over time, it is harder for the Iranians to control the strait. The challenge is for Iran, that is war by another name. And I don't think that they will continue to allow it. And at some point, they will decide they would rather go back to war than to see their assets continually eroded at in this bid to try to slowly take away their ability to have leverage over the strait.
And Elizabeth, senior U.S. officials on Friday, they reportedly demanded that Iran make a public statement saying the Strait of Hormuz is open and that ships won't be attacked. A Wall Street Journal analysis argues the conflict over the strait boils down to a vaguely worded paragraph in the MOU. The White House interprets the wording to mean Iran unlocks the strait, while Iran says it means it has exclusive control over the waterway. Can you explain why this framing is causing such a wide gap in interpretation?
Absolutely. I mean, look, you're also working with two countries that have a severe deficit of distrust between them. So essentially having a vague MOU that was going to give them 60 days to then agree upon all of the nitty-gritty details of this agreement just was creating the conditions for misinterpretation and for each country to sort of take away what they really wanted to from the MOU. Like, it was vague by design, it was vague on purpose. And unfortunately, what has happened is that now Iran sees the United States as violating that ceasefire by allowing for some vessels to go through the southern Omani route. And the United States sees Iran is violating the ceasefire by launching projectiles at vessels that are transiting in general. So I think it was just sort of made to cause confusion and concern, and for each of the parties to take away whatever they wanted from it. It's very problematic in diplomacy to not have very precise language, even for a temporary or short-term type of cessation of hostilities agreement. And unfortunately, that's what we're seeing here now.
You know, Nancy, despite Iran's agreement to restore safe passage through the state and the extensive financial incentives that it has received, Tehran has repeatedly targeted ships since the ceasefire took effect. And you argue, recent developments have made Iran more determined than ever to exert control of the waterway. Tehran may, in fact, prefer resuming a full-scale conflict to conceding authority over that strait. I know you touched on that, but can you go a little bit deeper into it? Why would Tehran actually think going to full-on war is to their advantage?
Because for Tehran, the Strait of Hormuz is its most important leverage. When it tried to be diplomatic and it tried to sort of show restraint from its perspective, it faced strikes from the United States in June and again in February. When it controls that waterway and has such say over the whole world's economy, people respond differently, and Iran has seen that, and it doesn't want to give it up. It has also seen the United States launch a very aggressive campaign over a matter of weeks, and it was able to sustain those attacks. It's able to bury some of its missile launchers and drone production facilities and other assets so that they can protect it. And so if the choice is losing control over the strait, and from its perspective, a key defense asset, it would rather that than agree to something in which they feel they're giving up too much of the leverage that they feel that they've gained during this war. And so for them, the worst case scenario is not keeping some sort of leverage over that strait. And it is now become their national security interest to keep it so, even if it means a resumption of war.
And Elizabeth, the Wall Street Journal reports senior U.S. officials said that a nuclear deal with Iran is growing increasingly unlikely. This as the president this week dismissed the need to seize Iran's enriched nuclear material. He says it's buried deep underground and Iranians don't have the equipment to retrieve it. So if the nuclear fuel was buried in that 2025 U.S. bombing of 3 nuclear sites, does that undercut Trump's argument that he launched this war because Iran posed an imminent threat?
Yeah, so this is a huge concession from the Trump administration. One, not just that the damage that they claimed had been done by the previous year's war was not accurate, but also that the administration came into this thinking that they would be very easily able to walk into a deal with Iran and sort of putting the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action that President Obama negotiated in 2015, into the mud. But unfortunately, what we're seeing now is, I think a misconception of what the Iranians actually were able to do. And let's not forget that the rest of the region is going to have a vote here as well. Nancy mentioned that the United States could return to strikes again. But, what we have seen previously from some of our Gulf partners, including what was reported about Saudi Arabia, is that the access basing and overflight is not necessarily given to the United States by default. The Saudis were able to take that away when they were concerned about hostilities resuming, the Kuwaitis as well. So I think, if we do see some sort of return to that, it's possible that our Gulf partners, whom we rely upon very heavily for our ability to maneuver in the region, could take away some of that maneuverability.
Okay. Elizabeth and Nancy, thank you very much for the conversation, both of you.